School class, and I'm probably not going to do that. I'm just going to let the expert speak. So once I get done reading my text, I'm going to let Brother David Parks come up here and just tell us what this text means. But anyway, so anyway, no, actually, like I said, I do have a thought. And so in Luke chapter number 22, verse number 31, it says, "And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. And he said unto him, Lord, I am ready to go with thee both into prison and to death. And he said, I tell thee, Peter, the cock shall not crow this day before that thou shalt thrice deny that thou knowest me. And he said unto them, When I sent unto you without purse and scrip and shoes, lacked ye anything? And they said, Nothing. Then said he unto them, But now he that hath a purse, let him take it, and likewise his scrip. And he that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. For I say unto you, that this that is written must yet be accomplished in me. And he was reckoned among the transgressors, for the things concerning me have an end. And they said, Lord, behold, here are two swords. And he said unto them, It is enough. And so again, for those of you who haven't been in here recently, we've been working away through the I guess I never really gave it a title, but we've kind of been working our way through the adversarial relationship Jesus had with the chief priest and the Pharisees and the scribes and everything. And so the last couple of weeks we had been on Judas and Judas, how Judas betrayed Jesus, and how Judas went to the chief priest and wanted to betray Jesus, and they gave him 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus. And we looked at that, and so we're going to go back to the Garden of Gethsemane. But I wanted us to see this passage right here, because to me this passage is very important, because we're going to see what was mentioned in this passage right here play out later in the Garden of Gethsemane. But the first thing I want us to notice here is, and we know that when you're studying this, everyone talks about Peter betraying the Lord. And so we see that in between from the Garden of Gethsemane, and then when Jesus goes and is before Pilate, we know that in that time period, Peter denies knowing the Lord, and he denies multiple times knowing the Lord. But Jesus told him it was going to happen. And Jesus told him and warned him, hey, this is going to happen to you. And sometimes, and I'm this way, and I think, most people probably are this way. Sometimes we only hear what we want to hear. And sometimes someone says something negative, and you're like, well, I'm just going to shut that down. I'm just going to shut that out. I'm not going to listen to that. But sometimes the best thing you can do is be swift to hear and slow to speak. It's one of the things I'm working on with Grady, and sometimes I feel bad, but it's something we all have to learn. Sometimes the best thing to do, Chris, is just to be swift to hear and slow to speak, and that's not necessarily our nature. My nature say something, and then I'm going to say something back. My wife, she's back there chuckling. She said, we've been married for 26 years. You still hadn't learned that lesson. But anyway, like I said, I'm working on it, Brother Parks. I'm working on it. But you understand, I mean, here's Jesus, and he's telling Peter that Satan hath desired to sift him as wheat. And instead of just saying, hey, well, what can I do to stop this? Wouldn't that have been the appropriate response? Wouldn't the appropriate response have been, well, tell me, how is he going to do it? What is he going to do? And what can I do to prevent it? Honestly, ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you know how to prevent it, it's a whole lot better than have to figure out how to fix it after you've made the mistake. But that's not what Peter does. Peter very rashly says, he says, I'm ready to go. I am ready to go with thee both in the prison and the death. And you know what? I believe that was true. I believe that statement was true. I believe that was true. I believe that Peter felt with all his heart that he would. And I think we're going to see that play out in a second. But I believe with all his heart, Peter said, hey, look, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. I'm ready. If you need someone to fight for you, I will fight for you. And so, but Peter didn't understand he didn't necessarily understand everything, which we're going to look at that whenever we finally get done with this lesson. We're going to get to the fact how the disciples missed over and over, even in this, that Jesus explained to them that he had to be numbered among the transgressors, and he was still trying to explain to them that these things were going to happen. And when we get over to the next passage right here, you're going to see even right there in the garden, he has to explain to them again, hey guys, this is how this is supposed to go. This is how it was designed from the beginning, from before Adam ever sinned, before the foundation of the world. I knew this moment was coming. I knew this moment was coming, and this is how this has to go. And so here's Peter, and Jesus says, hey, Satan hath desired to sift you as wheat. And he does a pretty good job. He does a pretty good job on it. But Jesus said, I've prayed for you. And when you are converted. And so it's a wonderful thing to me that Jesus tells Peter, you know what? I know you. I know who you are. And I know you're going to fall. I know you're going to fall. A lot of times people get saved. They get saved and they feel like they're never going to sin again. And we don't teach that. But when you first get saved, you're like, oh, okay, I'm a new person. I'm a new creature in Christ. Old things are passed away. All things are become new. And I'm never going to sin. And again, that's not what we teach. But sometimes that's how you feel. You just feel like, oh, I've got this defeated now. And then you fall. You fail. You make it. You commit some kind of sin, and you're like, "What do I do about it? What do I do about it now?" And I think this is a great passage to show a young Christian. Look, God understands. God doesn't want you to sin, and God is grieved when you sin, but He knows you're going to sin, and He made a way. He made a way to reconcile you back once you sin. And so here is Jesus, and He's talking to Peter, and He said, when you're converted, after you've fallen, and once you get back up, strengthen your brethren. After you've fallen, after you fail, after you've done this thing that's going to be so horrible in your mind right now, you can't even fathom it in your mind right now. Peter could not even fathom in his mind at that moment that he said, deny you nothing. I'll go to prison with you. I'll die with you before I deny you. And he couldn't even fathom in his mind that he would commit that sin. It wasn't even something he thought about. And Jesus tried to warn him. He's like, no, you don't understand, Jesus. That's not the first time Peter said, oh, no, you don't understand. And so here Peter is going to commit this sin, and Jesus knows he's going to commit this sin. And Jesus said, when you've been converted, strengthen your brethren. Once you've committed this sin of denying me, and once you get over it, and sometimes, honestly, I hate to, we all hate to admit it, but sometimes failure is the best teacher. Sometimes failure is the best teacher. I can tell my kids over and over and over something, but sometimes I'm like, okay, I've told them, and they're not listening. So what I'm going to do is, in this controlled environment, I'm just going to sit back and I'm going to let them fail. And then when they fail, I'm going to say, okay, now are you ready? Now are you ready to listen? Now are you ready to talk about it? Now do you want me to explain to you how to do what you're doing right there? Now do you want me to explain to you why I tried to tell you from the beginning, don't do it that way? And again, I mean, I'm that way. Sometimes I get stubborn. Sometimes I get, set in my ways. I'll admit it, Riley. But sometimes I'm just, I'm that way. I'm just stubborn, and sometimes I have to be allowed to fail. And when I was teaching, which Levi's not in here right now, or Jake's not in here right now, but when I was teaching, whenever I was a service technician and I was teaching, Brother Wayne, a lot of times I would let people do it wrong. I would let them do it wrong. Not to the point where they were going to tear something up, but I would let them do something wrong and then it not work. And then that was a teachable moment for me to say, okay, what did you do? Well, I did this. Okay, well, what's the problem now? This is what's going on. Okay, well, what do you think's going on? And you just use that moment as a teachable moment. And sometimes those teachable moments will last a whole lot longer than if I just say, okay, stop doing what you're doing and do this real quick. And they're not going to learn. But sometimes the best teacher is failure. And Peter was going to have to learn by failure. And Jesus said, once you learn by this failure, I want you to strengthen your brethren. I want you to strengthen your brethren. I want you to explain to them. I want you to make them understand that you're going to fall. You're going to fall. You're going to fail. And Satan, even though Jesus just used Peter, Satan didn't just desire to sift Peter as wheat. He desired to sift the other 11 as wheat. He'd already got Judas, but now he also desired to get the total of 11, the other 10 besides Peter. And so we have that context. But whenever you get down to verse number 36, then said he unto them, but now he that hath a purse, let him take it, and likewise his scrip, and he that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. For I say unto you that this that is written must yet be accomplished in me. And he was reckoned among the transgressors, for the things concerning me have an end. And they said, Lord, behold, here are 2 swords. And he said unto them, it is enough. Now, if you turn back to Matthew chapter number 26, Matthew chapter number 26 in verse number 50. In Matthew chapter number 26, let me mark my place right here. Matthew chapter number 26, verse number 50. It says, and Jesus, and so we know that he's talking to Judas again. Now we're back to where we were a couple weeks ago. And Jesus said unto him, friend, talking to Judas, calls him friend, even though he knows that he's already betrayed him. Wherefore art thou come? Then came they and laid hands on Jesus and took him. And behold, one of them which were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword. Jesus had just told them that they needed to carry a sword. Jesus had just told them, you need to have this sword. You need to have a sword. And they looked around and said, hey, we've got 2 with us. Is that enough? Now, a couple things, again, Brother Parks is going to explain to us in a little bit, is who was the other one carrying a sword that didn't pull out their sword? And then, was it God's will for Peter to use the sword? Now, again, so we know that Jesus told him to have the sword. Jesus told him, you need to have this sword with you. And so now here they are, and Jesus purposefully, if you remember from our study, that Jesus left 8 of them basically at the gate, and then he took Peter, James, and John in with him. And then he went in a little further, And then he went and prayed, and you know how that went. And then he comes back, and now here he is, and he is at least standing with Peter, James, and John. And here they are, and now they've come to take Jesus, and here Peter is standing here with this sword that Jesus had told him, you need to have this sword. And it says in verse 51, and behold, one of them which were with Jesus stretched out his hand, and drew his sword, and struck a servant of the high priest, and smote off his ear. Now, I don't want to get terribly descriptive in here, but we all understand if you've ever seen a cut on the head, it's nasty. I mean, you don't have to get cut very deep at all in the head for it to look like you're going to bleed out in just a matter of moments. The other week, I was working with Bub, and we were putting up some metal, and Cody's here. And he probably saw some of the evidence up there on the roof the other day. But I was working with Bub. They were putting some metal up on the roof, and I was one of the ground men, and we had another ground man that was putting the metal up to the roof, and then I was the one pushing the metal up on the roof, and Bub was up there putting metal down, and I don't know exactly how it happened. All I know is Bub got in the way. That's all I know. He got in the way. And so ground man was pushing. Ground man couldn't see what he was doing. He was just pushing. And Bub stuck his arm out there in the way. And when he did, he didn't say, ooh. He didn't say, ow. All he said is, I'm going to need stitches. And so he said he stuck his hand up there. And when he stuck his hand up there, the blood was shooting out between his fingers. It was shooting out of his arm. And Chris, I can tell you're enjoying this. If you want to, I'll let Bub bring his phone down. You can see the picture. It looks like he sliced his arm off. I mean, when you see it, it's only about a 1-inch slice. But it looks like, that from the picture, Brother Parks, it looks like he sliced his arm off. And so anyway, he's like, I'm going to need stitches. And so he had to come down off the roof, which if y'all know Bub, that's just not, like we still had work to do. And so when he come down, I'm like, just get Miss Hope to put a Band-Aid on it. You'll be fine. And so he went in. He come back out in a little bit, and it's almost healed up. It's still got a gap. It probably could have used a stitch or two just to get it sewed back together. But I told him it's gonna have a pretty cool scar that he'll have a good story to tell his kids one day. But you understand, like when you get cut on the face, it's bad. But you think about Peter smote his Malchus's, which we're going to read in a minute. It's Malchus. Peter smote his ear off. So we're not talking just hanging by there. We're talking about Jesus is going to have to bend down and pick up an ear and stick it back on this guy's head. Cody, you think about it. There's blood everywhere. There's blood everywhere. And it's important to understand that some of y'all are enjoying this and some of y'all are not enjoying this right here. But you have to understand, this, when you see this, it's something you don't forget. If you look at the picture of Bub's arm, when you see that picture, you're like, oh man. And it's something that'll be in your memory. And I asked my wife this morning, and all good Sunday school lessons I'll run through my wife. And so I asked my wife this morning, I said, hey, let me ask you a question. What was the last miracle that Jesus performed before he was crucified? And my wife, she had a theory, and I understand what she's saying. My wife said the thief on the cross being saved. And so I get it, I understand, but that wasn't where I was going, so it was the wrong answer. And I understand that every time someone gets saved, it's a miracle, but that's not what I was going for. That was not what I was going for. This right here, this is going to be the last miracle that Jesus performs before he goes to the cross. If you got something different, let me know. But as far as I know, this is the last miracle that Jesus performs before he goes to the cross. And technically, the thief on the cross, Jesus was on the cross. But before Jesus goes to the cross, this is the last miracle that Jesus is going to perform. And Brother Parks, who is this miracle performed for? This miracle is being performed in front of Roman soldiers, priests. That's who this miracle is being performed for. This miracle is not being performed for the masses. This miracle is not being performed for the people. This miracle is being performed so that the people that are about to go down and accuse Jesus of everything they're going to accuse him of, one more time, when they made their accusations against Jesus, etched in their mind, Brother Wayne, etched in their mind, they had to see this bloody head and where an ear was no longer there, and Jesus picking up an ear and sticking that ear back on there and healing that thing so it looked like it was never gone. I ask you again, was it God's will for Peter to smite that ear off? Again, like I said, if we were in Brother Mike's class, I'd start taking it and be like, Paul, what do you think? Brother Wayne, what do you think? What do you think? Again, because I know that Jesus is about to rebuke Peter. It's not a strong rebuke. It's not a strong rebuke. But I know he's about to. But Jesus told him to bring the sword. Jesus said, make sure you have a sword. We've got two. All right, that's enough. Guess what? You know why it was enough? Because they only needed one. They only needed one. And I know I don't always do it, but this is my spiritual food for thought today. Because I've been thinking about this. And again, like I said, I said earlier, Peter said, I'm willing to die for you. I'm willing to go to prison for you. Now you think about this on Peter's side. It may just be at this moment Jesus, Peter, James, and John. The Bible calls it multitudes. It wasn't just one police officer shows up at the house at 10 o'clock at night. That's not what this was. That's not what this was. Multitudes, Riley. Multitudes. We've got Roman soldiers. We've got people from the priests. We've got all these people that are multitudes there to arrest one man. And there is possibly on his behalf 2 men with a sword. And one of them says, you ain't arresting him. One of them. That was Peter. Again, and we know that Peter was very rash. He was very impulsive. He was very, again, and he didn't think it and say it. He said it and thought about it later. When Jesus was walking on the water in the midst of that storm, Peter's like, hey, I'm coming out with you. And he gets out there on the water, and then he looks and says, hey, it's pretty bad out here. Well, guess what? It was bad before he ever got out of the boat. It was bad before he ever got out of the boat. And he gets out there, and he's like, hey, it's pretty bad out here. And he says, the Lord saved me. And Jesus had to get on to him for doubting. And so, again, that's who Peter was. That's who he was. But here again, Chris, he's showing his love for Christ. And we know that he's going to deny in just a few moments. And just within an hour or two, he's going to deny ever knowing Christ. But at this juncture, at this very moment, he said, I will fight every single one of you for him. And I can't fault him for it. He said, I'll fight every single one. Jesus said, you need to have a sword. And they said, we have 2. And he said, that's enough. And Peter said, I'm going to be one of those guys carrying a sword. And if anybody tries to do anything to him, they're going to have to go through me. Now we know from let's look at verse in Luke chapter 22. Back to Luke chapter number 22. back in Luke chapter 22, verse number 47, it's the same story. And while he yet spake, behold, a multitude, and he that was called Judas, one of the 12, went before them and drew near unto Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said unto him, Judas, betrayest thou the Son of Man with a kiss? When they which were about him saw what would follow, they said unto him, Lord, shall we smite with the sword? So someone said, hey, shall we smite? Peter said, this is not the time to talk. This is time for action. And I get it. I understand it. Cody, I understand it. And sometimes you do the right thing the wrong way. And that could be the case right here, because Jesus is going to have to get onto it. It's the right thing. It's defending Jesus. But their lack of understanding that Jesus had told them over and over and over and over and over that this moment was coming. Even what we had just read in the previous verses, that all things in verse 37, for I say unto you that this that is written must yet be accomplished in me, and he was reckoned among the transgressors, for the things concerning me have an end. He had just told him that when he told him to bring a sword. And so again, here he is, and now we come to this moment, and this moment had to be. It had to be. But Peter had said, I deny you. Deny you? I would never deny you. I'll go to jail for you. I'll go to prison for you. I'll die for you. And guess what? When you are one man with a sword and there are multitudes, including Roman soldiers, standing there, that's not real good odds. But I'm going to say something else. But if you have faith, how many men did Samson slay with the jawbone? Peter, I think at this moment, again, because he didn't listen, because he didn't understand, because he still had a misunderstanding that Jesus was going to the cross. Jesus was going to the cross. Jesus was going to be crucified. And for him to be crucified, Judas had to forsake him. Judas had to do what he had to do. And then they had to have this fake trial that we're going to look at next week. They had to have this fake trial. And then Jesus was going to the cross. But Peter was not in that mode of, hey, I understand that Jesus is going to the cross. Peter was in the mode that he's my Lord, he's my Savior, and I will not only go to prison for him, I'll die for him. And when he pulled that sword out, again, he said, I'll either go to prison or I'll die right here, but you're not going to take him. He said, I'm going to go to prison or I'll die right here, but you're not going to take him. And Chris, somehow Jesus, again, I mean, if you're in fight mode, Jesus had to get him stopped where all he did was just take off an ear. Again, I mean, it's a miracle. That's all he did. Again, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess everyone's a little different, but I mean, a lot of people, once they get in that mode, they just go crazy. And it's not just going to be one swing in one ear. It's going to be multiple swings, multiple slashes, multiple stabbings, multiple woundings. But he only hurt one man. And that one man that he hurt, I think I think it was God's perfect will for Jesus to get to perform that miracle in front of them. Because what we're gonna look at next week, whenever we get to where Jesus is being tried, I'll tell you who wasn't there. I'll tell you who they didn't call for a witness. Did anyone say, "Hey, has anyone seen Malchus?" They'd have probably got themselves killed if Malchus' name. You ever seen someone do something at work and they get a vacation? They get a vacation. They're like, "Hey, you know what? Sometimes you're pre-warned, Cody, like, hey, OSHA's coming. Hey, OSHA's coming, and we know, number one, you don't work safe, and number two, you don't know how to be quiet, and so today's your day, because OSHA's coming today. Why don't you work at the house today? And I'm going to go ahead and pay you, but I just don't need you to be there." We have at work, Jake, we have ISO audits. I don't know if you've been through an ISO audit yet, but we have these ISO audits at work, and they come in and they go through your van. And so what you do is you pull off all the stuff from your van you're not allowed to have on your van. And then you go through the ISO audit, and then you take everything that you pulled off and you put it back on your van. So I did that one year, Cody. I had a bunch of used brass valves and stuff, and I sold the scrap metal, and I stuck it underneath the staircase at work. And we went in and did the audit, and I come back out. We got a scrap metal man that just rides around and picks up scrap metal, and he took my whole bucket of brass. I bet he got $100 worth of brass that I had just sitting under the thing. And so I didn't appreciate it, but everyone gets a good chuckle out of it. But that's what you do. You're having this ISO audit, and they prep you like, okay, you can say this, this, this. And it's like an open book test because you have all these questions. And my boss used to get so mad because I could only take so much of it because I think it's a bunch of nonsense. I could only take so much of it, and then I'd start pushing back. And my boss he'd be standing out there and be raising his eyebrows at me and trying to get me to hush, but I could only take so much because I thought it was nonsense. And I told the lady one time, I said, let me tell you something. I said, I know you don't like that I have this used part on my van, but at 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm standing in an air compressor room in Atlanta somewhere, and I'm 80 miles from my house, and this guy's whole plant's down, and he's losing $20,000, $30,000 an hour because his air compressor's down, if I stick this used part that you tell me I'm not supposed to have on there, he's going to be a whole lot happier with me than when I tell him the ISO lady told me I can't have this part, and we'll be glad to order it, and he's going to be down for 2 more days. That's all I'm saying. But you understand, I mean, sometimes you get yourself in those situations, and you're like, hey, what are we going to do right here? What are we going to do right here? And here's Peter, and he's in this situation. And again, I mean, when Peter gets in those situations, he doesn't think first. He reacts first. And he had already built himself up. He'd already built himself up that I'm going to go to prison or I'm going to die, but I'm doing one of those two, but you're not going to get me to deny you. Satan will not get me to deny him. And he smites that ear, but it's just that one ear. And somehow he stops. Somehow he stops. And Jesus is going to have to rebuke him. He's going to have to rebuke him. And so, again, in verse 50, it says, "And one of them smote the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. And Jesus answered and said, Suffer ye thus far?" Have you ever had to get on to somebody because you have to get on to them, but you really don't want to? I mean, we've got kids. I know Paul has proud dad moments. He has proud dad moments. Sometimes Bub would do something at work. Most time it annoyed him. But every once in a while he'd do something, and he's like, that was a proud dad moment right there. You know what I mean? I mean, sometimes you're like, that's my boy. that's my boy right there. And then you're like, all right, look, let's talk about this. Like, I can't have you doing that. I understand why you did it. I know why you did it, but I can't have you doing that. You know, I mean, let's not do that anymore. I'm not mad. I'm not mad. You're not going to get a spanking, okay? You're not. And sometimes they're like trembling, and you're like, look, I'm not mad. Riley, tell me you've had some of those with your boys where you're like, look, I get it, okay? You jumped off the roof of the house. Your mom didn't realize it. She comes out. She about had a heart attack. We've all jumped off the roof of the house. But you can't do that while your mom's watching, okay? Don't do that while your mom's watching. If it's just me and you at the house, it's okay. We'll go to the hospital. We'll go to the emergency room. We'll get a cast if you need it. But just don't do that while your mom's watching. Am I the only one that's had that conversation? Surely to goodness someone else in here has had those kind of moments. Brother Parks, please tell me that you've had to tell John, hey, look, John, you got a bunch of sisters, and they ain't going to let you do a thing. And I get it. You're a boy, and they're going to try. They're going to do things, and they're going to be like, oh, can you believe John did this? Yes, I can believe John did this because he's a boy. But, John, just don't do it while your mom and your sisters are watching, okay? Just don't do it. I almost feel like Jesus is like, Peter, I love you. I love you. I love you. And I know why you did it. But put your sword up. Just put your sword up. It's not the time. We'll look. Let me read verse 50. I think I read verse 51. It says, and Jesus answered and said, suffer ye thus far? And he touched his ear and healed him. Now, it's interesting because if you read in Matthew, Mark, or John, you know that Peter smote the ear off, even though not everyone says it was Peter, but again, we know who it is. But you know that Peter smote his ear off, but Luke's the only one that said, and Jesus healed him. I think that's pretty important. So Luke put it in there for us so that we understand that Jesus healed him. If you turn over to John chapter number 18, John chapter number 18, again, same passage right here. In John chapter number 18, Judas then, verse 3, Judas then having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees cometh thither with lanterns and torches and weapons. Jesus therefore, knowing all things that should come upon him, went forth and said unto them, whom seek ye? They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus saith unto them, I am he. And Judas also with him betrayed him and stood with him. As soon then as he had said unto them, I am he, they went backward and fell to the ground. Now again, the other gospels they don't mention this part. They don't mention this part. But as soon as Jesus says, I am he, you're talking grown men. You're talking soldiers. You're not talking, you're not talking Barney Fife, You're not talking, Concord security team members sometimes. We're talking grown soldiers. We're talking grown men that's what they do. And all Jesus said was, I am he. And Chris, they fell backwards. Then asked he them again, whom seek ye? They said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I have told you that I am he. If therefore you seek me, let these go their way. That the saying might be fulfilled, which he spake of them, which thou gavest me, have I lost none. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it, and smote the high priest's servant, and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Then said Jesus unto Peter, put up thy sword into the sheath. The cup which my Father hath given me, shall I not drink it? Again, Jesus lightly rebuked Peter. He said, put your sword up, Peter. This is not the time. The cup that my Father's given me, I'm going to drink it. Again, Peter still didn't understand. He still didn't understand that Jesus was going to the cross. And this was all part of it. But I want you to look in Luke chapter number 22. Let me find it here. in verse number 55. Luke 22, verse number 55, and we'll close. It's very interesting to me that in this passage right here, Luke 22, and let me start in verse 50. And one of them smote the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. And Jesus answered and said, Suffer ye thus far? And he touched him and healed him. Then Jesus said unto the chief priests and captains of the temples and elders which were come to him, Be ye come out as against a thief with swords and staves? When I was daily with you in the temple, ye stretched forth no hands against me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness. In Matthew chapter number 26, sorry, I got one more thing. In Matthew chapter number 26, verse 55, Jesus gets on, in verse 52, let me read verse 50. Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. I'm not 100% sure that was meant for Peter. Because in verse number 55, in that same hour said Jesus to the multitudes, Are ye come out as against a thief with swords and staves for to take me? Again, the Roman soldiers, there's people from the chief priests, there are people from there to take Jesus, and they come to take Jesus, a man that was daily with them in the temple. He said, I was with you in the temple. I was speaking openly, and you didn't take me then, but now you come and you've got multitudes to take me, one man, and you come with swords and staves. And Jesus used the opportunity of Peter smiting that ear off to say, hey, if you take the sword, put up again thy sword in its place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. And here's all these men that have already fallen back, Riley. They've already fallen back just at his name, just said, I am he, and they fell back. And here they are. And you think about it, because, you think about it. If your role is protection, and someone that you're going to take has a friend that takes out a sword, the first thing you would think would be all of them Roman soldiers would come at Peter. That's not what happened at all. And Jesus took this opportunity to do two things. One, he did the miracle to put that ear back on, so every one of those men that sat down there as they accused Jesus and as they listened to what they were saying about Jesus could have nothing bad to say about him. And two, he warned them and said, hey, y'all are the ones with the swords. If you take up the sword, you're going to perish with the sword. Thank you.